Jim graduated with a bachelor's in meteorology from Montana State in 1982, and he moved to Jackson Hole to work as a seasonal job with the National Park Service. He spent 14 years as a climbing ranger, so like he said, he's getting paid to hike and climb in the Tetons, which is very rough duty. And in the winter months, Jim worked as a guide for high mountain heli-ski, which is still at stopped, for about 20 years until he got paid to powder ski every winter. You know, it's a hell of a life he's had to live, but somebody has to do it, I guess. So he's, you know, it's about 30 years since Jim bought a computer and started attempting to forecast weather here. But initially that was for the heli-ski operation, so they knew when to go and when not to. But by 1994, he was broadcasting the weather forecast on the local radio stations. And then in 1997, has anybody not visited mountainweather.com? Does anybody care about weather? If you care about weather, I encourage you to make a bookmark for mountainweather.com. Anyway, he says his climbing and heli-skiing days are over now. Well, maybe. Most of the time is spent on the computer, maintaining the website, teaching weather courses to the general public, maybe tonight counts, and to the United States military. Since the 1990s, Jim has also written a weather column for the local newspaper, and his mountain weather column currently appears every other week. It was just in this past week's Wednesday, Jackson Hole News and Guide, where he often reviews Jackson Hole's weather and climate, which happens to be the topic of tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up and turn the floor over to Mr. Jim Woodmencey.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Am I broadcasting? Because I haven't done that for a while now. It's been a few years. Title of my talk, in case you came here to find out how to forecast weather or how much it's going to snow the next few days or the rest of the winter, you're in the wrong room. I'm not talking about that tonight. So if you want to make space for some other people, you guys can all leave. Otherwise, the topic I chose this year is sort of a follow-up to a talk I did a few years ago just talking about Jackson weather patterns and climate. And I thought since climate seems to be on everybody's frontal lobe these days, I wanted to not necessarily dispel myths, which is what the guy in the newspaper wrote, but just walk you through our climate, how we come about compiling our climate, and look at it first, you know, from a very narrow view, our daily weather, and then expand out from that monthly, annually, and then even expand out from there as far as our climate goes across the globe, basically. And I'm not a climatologist. I'm not an expert in climate. I'm a meteorologist. Meteorologists are just liars. I think Lewis Black uses that in one of his routines. Because most of what we tell you doesn't come true, or it doesn't come true the way you perceive it. Okay? And that's part of what this talk is about, is your perception of the weather and the climate. Okay? And the reason I call it the atmospheric assessment, that is not my term. I didn't make that up. I'd like to think I was that creative. But it actually came from a technical paper done in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society by a couple professors out of the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. And it's a very, very good paper if you have a chance to look it up and read it. It's not overly scientifically laden with graphs and things like that, which my talk is going to be. Okay? So prepare yourselves for that. The person next to you will probably give you an elbow every time your head starts to bob. All right? My inspiration for putting this talk together came from that paper, and also an interview I did with a young fifth grader at the Journey School, August Yost, local kid, who was doing a project, and the title of his project, or his presentation, was Climate Change and Its Effect on the Ski Industry, which is, for a fifth grader, I wasn't doing that kind of stuff in fifth grade. I was getting hit in the head with baseballs and getting knocked over by bigger kids. Anyway, he did a great job with it. There was some things that he was learning in school that I didn't necessarily get on board with. And so when he gave me a draft of his paper, there was some notes I sent back to him, and to try and clear a few things up. So anyway, those were the two papers that I read recently that inspired me to come and give you my 2 cents. As I was growing up, becoming a young adult, my mommy told me there's 2 topics you never want to talk about in public. One is politics, and the other is religion. I am going to profess, somewhat weakly, that I am apolitical and almost an agnostic. You could ask my wife how often I go to church with her. Okay? So I have no bias here other than the fact that I am a meteorologist and I look at the weather a lot, and especially here. I'm going to add one more thing to this list of things you should never talk about in public, and that would be the climate. Oh dear. If anybody brought their lunch and has fresh tomatoes in it or anything like that, please leave them in the bag, okay? I'm not going to say anything profound, I don't think. I'm just going to present to you our climate and what I know about the broader climate that we live in. Since I started school in the late 70s, I'm going on 40 years of studying the weather, both from an academic standpoint to being outside in it a lot in those 20 plus years of running around the mountains in a lot of different places. So I'm going to try to leave politics and that guy out of it. I'm going to try to leave religion and that guy out of it, and I'll leave that guy out of it too. Okay, so here we go. Weather and climate, our perceptions. I'm going to start with weather. What I've noticed is that people love to blame the weather on something. Okay? They like it to be something simple that they can spout right off the end of their tongue. So it's easy to remember and to repeat at parties. Okay? Things we blame the weather on. And I'll talk about weather fears and I'll talk about climate fears. But this is the article I just wrote in the Jacksonville News and Guide this past week. So if you hurry up, after you get out of here, you can go buy the last copy at the liquor store. And tomorrow, a new one comes out, and I'm not in it. So you've all heard these terms lately, right? Atmospheric river, polar vortex. Actually, you have to say that a little bit differently. The polar vortex. I mean, it has to sound more ominous. And then the bomb cyclone. Oh my God. It's like we're getting shelled by weather, right? Isn't that your perception? It's got to be something bad. And the media these days, and I'm not going to finger anybody except the Weather Channel, they go on and on with these terms. Oh, we got an atmospheric river, we got a polar vortex, we got a bomb cyclone forming. Like it's something new. It's not. These are not new phenomenon. They've been going on for years. The names actually date back to probably the 1950s if you read the research papers on any of these terms. Okay? So you want further explanation about what they are? Go buy a newspaper or look it up online. It'll be there too. Climatic fears. Okay? When I was going to college, the things that affected or changed the climate and the things that they said were scary were volcanic eruptions. Changes the climate. The next few years will be colder than normal. You'll get more snow than normal, blah, 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 blah. Sunspots, that was another one. I never got my head wrapped around that because I'm not an astronomer. I'm a meteorologist, okay? Meteor is in the title, but that doesn't mean I know anything about astronomy. And then Along came El Nino. How many have seen Chris Farley's El Nino from Saturday Night Live? Okay, make a big deal out of it, that like it's some, like El Nino is a big storm. Does anybody think that? Because it isn't. All it is the temperatures in the equatorial Pacific either above or below normal. And in this case, El Nino, it would be above normal. All right, but that affects weather patterns. All right, and longer term weather. In the 70s, when I took my first climate class, what they were talking about then was global cooling and how bad it was going to be for us, because the next 30 years were guaranteed to be much colder. This is late 70s, okay? The claims, you know, all kinds, same claims. Famine, people are going to die. People won't be able to inhabit the earth. Blah, 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 okay? Unfortunately, that was the tail end of it. It was cooler. I'll show you when it was cooler. Then as we moved into the late 90s, the pace started picking up about global warming, and that one guy, not the Pope, but the other guy's movie came out. That got people all Twitter-pated about the climate. And in some instances, rightfully so. But then all of a sudden, I don't remember when it was exactly, that term got pushed aside and they started calling it just climate change, because that was more broad brush, covered everything. You know, it didn't matter what the temperature did. You could blame any weather we got on climate change. Can't blame a snowstorm on global warming. Although they, not me, I was going to say they, but everybody, when they refer to whoever the weather forecaster is, they always say, well, they said it's going to. Well, they've tried that, and they try to explain that. Also, one other thing I want to make very clear. I did not misspell that word. If you thought I did, there is a difference between climatic and climactic. Climatic has to do with weather phenomenon. Climactic has to do with things that excite you, stimulate you. You know what I mean. So I didn't misspell that word. Some people, I've seen it in newspapers and other people who email me back and forth and say, well, what about this climactic situation we have? I can't talk about that, okay? So weather is what we observe on a daily basis. Climate is the compilation of all that, okay? Where we get it from is the local climate station here, and there's a number of them that are active across the United States, a little over 1,100 active climate stations that are taking weather. When I was interviewed by the paper for this talk, I gave him this quote, and I attributed it to Mark Twain. Mark Twain used this quote, but it's actually Robert Heinlein who first is credited with coming up with that. And I really like it. It hits the nail on the head. You know, climate is what you expect. The weather is what you get. 3 or 4 people were in here when I was trying to tuck my shirt in and get all these mics on me before we started tonight. And every question was, oh, it's never been this warm, has it? Oh, 40 degrees today in January. It's never been 40 degrees in January. Okay, I'm about to show you it has. All right.
There you go.
Our climate station has always been located pretty close to where the Forest Service building is, and it hasn't really moved location, which is good, because other climate stations like the one in Moose, in Grand Teton National Park, and Moran have moved great distances and changed their geographic location and their elevation. So they're not as long a record, continuous record, as the Jackson station is. This is our best indicator of our climate here in Jackson Hole. Okay, it at least gets you the best ballpark estimate of what we're dealing with. Okay, this is the old standard weather station that you see here, and this is what the inside of that Stevenson weather shelter looks like. And they're supposed to be, in a snowy climate, able to raise it up off the ground as the snow depth builds. They just usually stomp it around or move it. You can see the rain gauge in the background. What's inside the housing is 2 glass thermometers. And in the summer, they use a mercury thermometer. In the winter, they switch them to alcohol thermometers because mercury freezes at about 40 below Fahrenheit or Celsius. They're the same, okay? Some years they forgot. So be it. But they had this nifty little box here in the bottom with a rotating drum on it that ran, you wound it up like a clock, and then it had a needle on it that had a little drop of ink on it that you had to put on every day. We had one of these up at Montana State as well. And then it would rotate around and you'd get a week's worth of temperature graph as that needle moved up and down, so you could get all the highs and lows. Even if the thermometer broke or you forgot to take a reading, you still had a backup with that little recording instrument in the bottom. That was the backup for temperature, that little box right there. And every day at a certain time, people would go out and take a reading each day, except for holidays and vacations and whatnot. No, that happened, but there's tons of missing data. I'll talk about that. This is where the new station is. It's just basically a few hundred yards to the north behind the visitor center. There's the precipitation can, the snow stick, and then the thermometer now is a thermistor housed in that little instrument shelter that looks like this to protect it from moisture and wind and things like that, which can actually change the temperature. You just don't take temperatures with a thermometer that's sitting out getting wet. So the advantage there, since around 2014 when they got this all moved over, is that the temperature record is unbroken now. We get temperatures every day, regardless of whether somebody's out there making an observation or not, where in the old days you had to reset the thermometers every day. So that's an advantage, and this is the way all these climate stations in the United States are switching over. They're all maintained by the Weather Service, basically, and so they calibrate everything, do the sighting and all that stuff.
Who paid for that building? Was it the Weather Service that put that up? Or?
The building?
Well,
no, that's a visitor center.
Well, no, but that weather.
Yeah, the Weather Service pays for all the instrumentation. Yep. Yeah, originally the precipitation can, everything was on the the precipitation can was out in a nice big flat open area to the north of the building. And it didn't take them long that first summer to figure out that it was right in line with the sprinkler system that came on to keep the grass going. So that's why they moved it to that back side of the building where they don't run any sprinklers. Anyway, here's the red dots, the location of that weather station. This photo I got from the Montaigne family from the top of Snow King back around 1957. And the site, the location really hasn't changed much in even the last 100 years, really. I mean, we got more buildings, more streets, more concrete, more asphalt, those kinds of things. But adjacent to that is the elk refuge, and that really hasn't changed. This is something that's very, very unique across not just the United States, but the whole world. Weather stations that have been in existence, say, for the last 100 years or so, have all had stuff build up around them. And some of the reasons stations get moved is because some developer bought that lot and, you know, I'm going to put a condo on it and you're moving your weather station. So I can't verify that, but I imagine that happens somewhere. John, he told you I had a BS in meteorology. He just said a bachelor's degree. It's a BS. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right. So we really haven't moved location, and we haven't changed the surroundings too much compared to a lot of other stations. The oldest observations were from 1899. In I think it was September and October, and then there wasn't anything until the early 1900s, and that was very sporadic. Month here, month there, 3 months, 4 months, and then nothing for a year. And then around 1920, early 1920s, it became more consistent. And once you get into the 30s and 40s, it was more consistent. However, there's still lots of holes in the data, lots of missing data. And what you have to understand, in order to, for instance, compile weather data for a month, I have to have temperatures every day. And the rule is to be counted in as far as climate studies go and as far as the National Center for Environmental Information goes. If you're missing 5 days or more in a month gets thrown out. Okay? That goes for precip, that goes for temperatures. What we can still get, maybe, is a few extremes, a record, perhaps, okay? That might have just got taken, logged for a date, and recorded, but the rest of the month is gone. But you can still use that. So the data set is still there for every month and every day to look at, but you can't use a month that doesn't have complete data to figure into the averages, okay? For obvious reasons. If it was cold, really cold the first half of January, and the second half of January was really warm, and you didn't have any temperature readings from the 1st to the 15th, you could end up with an average temperature for January that is artificially way too warm, okay? So, precip, kind of the same thing, and there's missing data in there. But just as an example of a day-to-day, daily weather observations and the extremes of temperature that are in the record books, and I just picked the 1st of January as an example. The average high temperature in Jackson's 26, the average low is 3. That's the average. That's what's supposed to be normal. Here's a little hint. There's no normal. There's no such thing as normal. Averages are created by our extremes. These are our extremes. On January 1st, the coldest, absolutely coldest day on record, officially, at the Jackson Climate Station, 1979, New Year's Day, the high was minus 22, the low was minus 50. Now, some of you folks, how many have lived here, who lived through that? How many were here way before that? Okay, like how many were here in 1900? All right. A lot of you are saying, oh no, it was minus 63. I saw it, I read it in the paper. Well, that was not from the official thermometer. As a matter of fact, even Moose, which you think might be colder, minus 46 is their coldest temperature ever recorded at Moose. So the minus 63, it came off somebody else's thermometer from the hardware store or something. It wasn't digital, I'm sure of that, from 1979. The warmest January 1st ever was in 1997. We had a high of 47 and a low of 43. But it's never been 40 degrees in January in Jackson. So you know the BS is coming out, right? The difference between the coldest and warmest high temperature on January 1st is 69 degrees. That's the swing. That's as cold or as warm as it can get in Jackson on January 1st until the next record's broken. Okay? The spread for low temperature, an overnight low on January 1st, is 93 degrees. That's huge. Now, if that happened in a day or over a few days, we swung that big, you'd be concerned, wouldn't you? Okay. Looking at it from a monthly basis, the record low, again, minus 50, but the record high, 58. That happened back in 1925. Hottest New Year's Day ever. Or actually, it was the 31st, so the last day of January. Coldest was on the 1st, New Year's Day, that morning. Okay? So there you got a 108 degree difference from the beginning of the month to the end of the month in the record books in January, which is actually when you get your biggest fluctuations in warm and cold temperatures. Summers are not as radical that way. Okay? Here's the actual data sheet from January 1st, 1979. That morning, they rung it up, -50. Okay? A few days later, it got down to -47. Okay, still pretty cold, end of the first week in January that year. And then a couple days later, 4 days later, the high was 38. Okay? Well, that's 85 degrees in 4 days. Well, that never happens. Well, it did. There's a record. 1925, January 31st. It wasn't just the 58 on the last day. It was a string of 50-degree days like we've never seen. Never. But guess what? That wasn't the warmest January ever. That was in like 1953, because we still had relatively cold temperatures at the beginning of the month. So in order to make a record month, say for warmth or cold, I can't just have a few days of record cold. I got to have a string of record cold. One more example of how wild the temperature swings can be here. This was a couple years ago, and I actually showed this same slide. It must have been 2 years ago in here. But if you look at start at the left, beginning of December when you had a high of 31 and down to a low of -24, there was a 55-degree swing over just a couple of days. A couple days later, it swung back up. Temperature rose 61 degrees. It didn't hit 61 in Jackson. That would be a record. But the temperature swing going from -24 up to 37, that's huge. Okay? Then a week later, we dropped another 54 degrees and we gained another 50 degrees within a couple of days. That's how wild it is here. I'm sure it is other places, but I don't study those places. I only study this place. Okay? And that was 2016. That wasn't the coldest December ever. That was 1991. All right, let's talk about hot. Seems to be something, well, kind of a hot topic, really. Heat, warmth. Highest temperature ever recorded in Jackson, 101 degrees. On 2 different days in 1934. And if I didn't see it for myself, I'd say, somebody else has a BS. But it happened 2 days that were separated by 2 days. And that's pretty impressive. But I can't use this month as the hottest month, because the record for high temperatures is incomplete. I mean, one way I like to gauge the hottest month of the summer is by the average high temperatures that are occurring, and I'm missing too many days. So it's not even in the record books as a monthly stat, okay? But the lowest temperature ever recorded in the month of July in Jackson is 24. So if somebody tells you, oh yeah, sometimes it gets down in the teens here in Jackson in July, and it snows like a foot, they also have a BS. Maybe something more than that. So anyway, the difference between the record high and the record low in the month of July is only 77 degrees compared to 108 in the month of January, right? So temperatures it's pretty steady here in the summer. We only potentially have a swing in temperature of 77 degrees possible. Okay? That's kind of nice. On mountainweather.com, there's a local climate page, and I've compiled all the averages, monthly averages for the temperatures and precip and snowfall and snow depth. And then also the averages for each month and the records for every month are listed in there as well. So you too can have hours of fun perusing Jackson's weather data. One of the things I didn't get to is precipitation in my analysis coming up here. But what I want to ask you, and you guys, by the way, I don't know if John mentioned it, but don't ask me questions while I'm talking, because I might answer it before I'm done. And I have limited time with you, so I want to get through it. But I'll let you ask me questions at the end. But I want to ask you questions, if that's okay. And just think about it. What do you remember about 2019? What was memorable? February. That it?
Short summer. No fire season.
Short summer, no fires.
Weird snow in June.
Yeah, that's weird. Never does that here. Weird snow in June. Yeah. No, we accumulated snow. Yeah. No, more, I think in the summer of 2019, I'd say spring to fall, more weddings were ruined this year than any other year. Everybody that had an outdoor wedding had weather to deal with. My daughter works weddings, and she could tell you, there were some grim days. There was some good ones, but anyway, we had a pretty remarkable 2019 from a lot of different perspectives. And you lived through this. And you need to remember 2019. Stick it in the back of your head. Just like the media, breaking news alert. Snap you out of it. Now you're supposed to pay attention. Okay? Here's the rundown of the stats, which I went back through records 3 times to make sure that I got everything right. Not just the records from 2019. I do that anyway. But some things stuck out. But just the quick synopsis here for 2019 compared to our long-term averages. In other words, what we consider to be normal for the year. Our average annual temperature, high temperature, is 54. And we were 5 degrees colder than that for the year. The whole year, all the months of the year, 12 of them put together. Okay? Low temperature was just a degree below, but the mean temperature, which is the average of the two, was more than 3 degrees, 3.1 degrees colder. Does that worry you? Is that big? 3 degrees in a year? Did you even notice? Did you notice that 2019 overall was 3.1 degrees colder than the average here?
Yeah, it's a short summer.
Yeah, it seemed short, seemed cold. Matter of fact, every single month had a below normal average high temperature. Except for November, it was right at average. Right at it. I couldn't fudge it a tenth of a degree one way or the other. Okay? That's significant. I think there was, I wrote it down so I wouldn't say the wrong thing because, you know, somebody will quote me. There was only 3 months that had above normal average low temperatures, April, July, and September. So they were warmer overnight lows. And 2 of those, June and August, were right at the average as well. So our overnight low temperatures weren't radically colder, only a degree over the whole course of the year, with all those cold daytime temperatures thrown in there. But still, it produced a year that was 3 degrees colder than normal. Okay. What's remarkable about that? A couple of things. I'll point them out in a second. Before I move to what's remarkable, one of the things that got screwed up with our precipitation measurement and snowfall measurement in 2019 was the government shutdown for 3 weeks in January. The bucket was filling up, but with snow and ice, and may have gotten clogged. I'm not sure. Even though the precip for the year ended up being above normal, I think we had more precip than what's shown here. And snowfall as well. That's the snowfall, not including those 3 weeks in January when we weren't recording anything. I wouldn't be that bothered by it if we had been under high pressure and it was dry and we weren't getting snow, but we were. And if I had been on it and known that that was going to go on and on, I would have gone down there every day and measured that snowfall and the precip. But oh well, we still came out above normal in the precip and snowfall category for 2019. Remarkable things were that's the coldest annual average high temperature that we have ever had in Jackson in all the records that I have complete months for. Okay? The old record was 50.4 back in 1968. It also is the coldest year ever based on annual mean temperature. That's your gauge for what's a cold year, what's a hot year. That's taking into account the average highs and the average lows. You lived through the coldest year ever in Jackson. Did it feel like it?
Sometimes.
Yeah, we have polypro and down and stuff like that now. We don't care. And Lower Valley's a lot more consistent with their power than they used to be, like back in 1979, before my wife worked there. Yeah, I mean, you're only looking at 1/10 of a degree, but in 1944 held the old record, 35.5 degrees for the annual mean temperature. It was, as everybody probably figured, it was the coldest October on record. The average high temperature in October, 13 degrees below the average, below the normal. That's like off the charts significant. That has never happened here, okay? We also had the snowiest, you called that one, beat that by 22 inches, more than a nose, I would say. That was 1978. It also was the second snowiest month on record. The snowiest month ever was 56 inches in January of 1969. I had Christopher Burt call me, he's a weather historian for what used to be Weather Channel, Weather Underground. And he said, can't you just find like another inch? Because it actually was 55.1 inches. And when I told him, I said, well, the reading that they take on the 1st of March, which would include the snowfall from the 28th of February, doesn't count for February, it counts for March. And he's like, anyway, just to put it in perspective, the average snowfall in February in Jackson's 14 inches. And that was, again, off the charts, off the charts. The mountains blew records away too for February, and also the second snowiest month on record at the Jacksonville Mountain Resort. All right, that's snow. We'll go, and that was 2019. Now let's look at the long-term record. A lot of holes in there. Every bar is a complete year for being able to have a complete data set of average high and average low temperatures. So thus, there's some holes to be had. But even standing back and looking at that, and what I did is I put the average mean temperature line in there, the green line at 39 degrees. That's where 1934 isn't in there because we missed too many days. That was that year we hit 101. So the other two high bars, actually the highest two bars on the graph, were from 1930 and 1933. Going forward in time, somewhere late 50s to maybe early mid 70s, that's the coldest block of time we've ever had here in Jackson, and a fairly long stretch. I have 1 bar above the green line, the average, and this is the average in the long term for all the years put together, okay? So that bar, will fluctuate just a little bit, but not more than a degree or so as you keep adding data to it. But yeah, that was those years. Who was here in the 50s, 60s? 2 of you? 4 of you? Was it cold? Snowy? Is it as cold as last year? Because if you tell me it was, you're lying. Should work the other way. Last year should have seemed way colder, because the older we get, the softer we get, and the less tolerant we are of the weather. And I think one of the reasons we're less tolerant is because of all the creature comforts we have, and fewer people work outside. They're not out in it all the time, complaining about it as much. They go from their heated house to their heated car with heated seats to their heated office. So never really, yeah, it was chilly today. I mean, that's all they say about last year. It was chilly. You can get outside there and stand in it a while, pounding nails. Who pounds nails? Where's my nail pounders in the room? It was cold, wasn't it? Wet, miserable. Son of a gun. All right. Then we went into the 90s and early 2000s. And that's hot. That's as hot as we've got. That's, if you want to label it, if you need a label, simple label, there's your global warming. Here's your global cooling. So when I was in school, they were like, this isn't going to end, ever. Fast forward 15 years, and we're back going the other way. Okay? So there's a cycle there. And we know it was warm back here in the 30s across the country, because that's when the Dust Bowl was. Okay? And we're cold and snowy here. And somewhere in here, after World War II, Rod Newcomb could tell you this story, is when they started building ski areas in the United States. When was Alta built?
37.
Late 40s. And then Snow King had something in the late 30s, didn't they? But it wasn't really a ski area per se until maybe just after the war. They didn't, back then it was so cold and so snowy, nobody ever even fathomed snowmaking? God makes that. Whoops, sorry, I wouldn't talk about religion. Scratch that. It snowed a lot. It was cold. You didn't need snowmaking, okay? Then, we kind of creeped into the 90s, and people are like, well, maybe we should have put the base of Jackson Hole at like where Casper Restaurant is, kind of like over at Targhee, and then we wouldn't have to worry about not having snow on the lower mountain. But then we go back to years like we've had. Oh, there's plenty of snow. It's not a problem. And it's cold. They'll probably fire the snowmaking crew. That'll be the next thing. And then it'll warm up again. I'm sure of it. Okay? But almost every line there, I think, except for 2015 or 16, was above the median, above the average for the annual mean temperature. Again, that's the whole dang year. Another way to look at that is to look at not just the mean or the averages, but to look at those extremes. Look at number of days per year that we go above 90 degrees in Jackson. And I hear this all the time. Every time somebody drives by a bank thermometer. Oh, look at that, it's 102. It's hot today, right? Or they look at their little thermometer in their rearview mirror, and they had it parked facing in the sun, and they get in, and it's January, and it's 60. And they're like, wow, that's hot for January. This is the official thermometer, okay? This is our record keeper. This is very carefully monitored, right? Well, back in the 30s, we used to average, the high average was 1934, and we missed some days in there, but I can at least go back and count how many days that were recorded at above 90 degrees or above, and 1934 had 25 of them. That was off the charts for the time. Then wherever there's zeros, there weren't any. So you see, as we went into the 50s and 60s and early 70s, there's only a couple of outliers where it had 10 or 11 days. But the average overall, long-term average, is about 4 days a year where it hits 90 degrees or warmer. 2003 broke the record for the number of days. I think there was, in July alone, something like 17 days of 90 degrees or hotter, but nothing that reached record high. Nothing over 100. Never even hit 100. 98 officially. And then look at from 2009 through 2017, bracketed by 2008 and 2018. So a 10-year period, basically, that we would never even hit 90. We haven't had that long of a string of years where we didn't register a 90-degree temperature in Jackson. We averaged 4. That's going to drag that average down. We need to heat it up a little bit. If I see one of you guys out there at the weather station with a hair dryer this summer, I'll make it 100. They have a webcam, so watch out. Okay. We tagged a 90 in 2008, and we tagged 90 in 2018, last summer, or summer before last. Last summer we didn't even come close. Okay, so that was a warm stretch. Look at how many high bars there are there. Okay, that makes sense. That lines up with our warmest years, basically the late 80s to the early to mid 2000s. Okay, and nothing on that end of the spectrum. So if you've complained in the summer that it's been too hot, I have about 8 words I could use to say what you are that I can't use anymore. Okay, so use one that's in your imagination. All right. What about days that it gets down at or below 0 degrees Fahrenheit? 0 degrees Fahrenheit, not like below freezing 0 Celsius. Okay. Back in the mid 40s, 1944, which you remember was the previous coldest year ever, we had 70 days where it was 0 or below. Next would have been in 52, and that had 63 days. Last year ranks number 3 for number of days that we spent with a low temperature in the morning of 0 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. That's significant, I think. Like, we haven't seen, unless you were here in the 40s and 50s, you wouldn't have a clue. There was, some in the late 90s. Usually what happens with cold temperatures like that, sustained cold, is when we have a drought or we're really dry. Okay, and that would make sense maybe back here and certainly in the 80s. When we look at how much snowfall we get on an annual basis, that kind of jives with the drier years or the colder years, usually. Like I said, I don't have all the precip numbers for our entire history plotted up. I just didn't have time to get that done. But I do have the updated snowfall numbers from this record spans for town of Jackson, 56 years. Again, there's a few years of missing snowfall data. Again, if I don't have, this is a winter snowfall, so you're looking at basically starting in August and going through July is your snow year, basically. So October, November, if they're missing, then I can't really count it. But if there's snowfall total in there, then I can. Definitely, if you were here in the 60s and early 70s, those were the biggest winters ever. But we've been on the rebound coming out of the 80s and into the 2000s. We've had a few years in the last 10 that have dropped off below normal for sure in town. But overall, the last 10 years, we've had 3 pretty significant winters. And if you go back to 2008-9, which rivaled some of the winters, I think that was the 3rd snowiest winter in Jackson was 2008-2009. And again, the 2018-19 number is short a few inches. That 119 inches. There was snow that fell in January. So I won't be able to use that bar outside of this room. Because they'd go, well, that's not an accurate number. I should put 119 plus. That'd be all right. Mountain, interesting thing here, 96, 97 blew the doors off of every other winter here in Jackson. And that was that 225 inches in December of 1996 that helped with that. But if you look at this a little closer, 7 out of the top 10 winters at the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, and this is from Rendezvous Bowl, 95, 80 feet, have all occurred in the last 14 years. So anyone who tries to sell me on the fact that it doesn't snow in our mountains anymore, you got a better BS than me. That's all I can say. I think that's telling. We whine about the skiing. That's just because there's too many people. Powder ain't what powder used to be here. You could wait a couple days and go, oh, you got a big dump on Wednesday? I'm out there Saturday. I'll be fine. I'll find fresh tracks. There's no powder days anymore in Jackson Hole. Hey, turn off the mic. Don't quote me on this. Newspaper people. There's no powder days. It's a powder hour. That's all you get. Sorry, I almost got political there, didn't I? I didn't mention the icon pass, did I? All right. So that's kind of Jackson Hole's climate right there. We're in a unique geographic area. It's unique here. But I just showed you how all over the map we can be with our temperatures, with our snowfall. It's all pretty incredible to me to watch it. I've had the opportunity to watch it up close and personal for almost 30 years, trying to forecast ahead how much snow we're going to get, what the temperatures are going to do, and I look at the daily temperatures every day to say, well, is it going to be warmer than that or colder than that tomorrow? What's the trend? Where are we going? Looking at the computer models for guidance, and you're still wrong. But I mean, and then the opportunity to do this and to take the whole compilation of all our data and dive into the history of our weather by looking at those records. I mean, it almost makes you feel like you were there sometimes. You know what I mean? It's really, it's cool. And I get a little choked up about it. Anyway, so let's just kind of look at the big picture for, the continental United States. And this is going back to about 1900 to 2010, 2015. The big spike up there at the far right end of the graph, that's 2016. That was one of the hottest Julys ever. I'm looking at midsummer, hottest month of the year. Where were we at for max temperatures? Still, man, you go back to the Dust Bowl, that's the hottest. We don't come close to the hot that was as far as maximum temperatures at all those stations. It's like 1,100 and some stations with records, not all of them going all the way back, of course, to 1900. So the data on the left side of the graph is fewer stations. There was this anomaly in 1993, I don't know if you remember that. That was actually the coldest summer we ever had here in Jackson, and it was a cold summer across the United States. Talk about snow in July and and all that. I remember, and Rod might remember that year, because I was working as a ranger in the park, and all the rotations of rangers that went through, we measured the snowfall in July at the lower saddle, and we got almost 7 feet of snow at 11,000 feet.
It's Mount Pinatubo, cooling from Mount Pinatubo.
There you go. Thanks, Mike. Yep. So one volcano. See, I told you, I learned that in college. I forgot it already, and I showed it to you in the first slide. I should have put that on there, Mount Pinatubo. That's what caused that. We can all say that, can't we? It's simple.
We can say it.
Yeah, sure. Mount Pinatubo caused that, knowing nothing else. Okay, that's all right. And there we are again, the 50s to around 80, 1950 to 80, that 30-year period. That's when it was coldest in the United States. Okay, and we're kind of up and down, a little more radical here. The last almost 15 years it's on this data, but last year tanked. The very far right end of the graph there. Oops, dimming the lights. Nope, can't do it. Sorry. Let me go back. There, where I circled it in orange, that's kind of the last 10, 15 years. And the very last year that we had there would be 2018, I believe. And that was cold across the country for maximum temperatures in July, at least. That's all I was looking at there. So I thought, well, what about the rest of the country? How many times do they get over 90 degrees? It's probably a lot. So where they analyze it, this is from NOAA, the percentage of days that get over 95 degrees on an annual basis, through time. And again, you go back to the mid-30s, and that was the highest. And we've been, the rest of the country's been below that, actually. The average is like 4 or 5 days, 4.4 days, that's what the number is on the right. Highest was 9.8. And so that trend line would show decreasing. And there's 1993 again. That's Mount Pinatubo caused that. Not lying, I got it from a doctor. PhD, right? Piled high and deeper. BS, PhD. Yeah, we're all in the same boat, Mike. So those, again, there's like late 50s to late 70s being some of the coldest or fewest number of days that got over 95 degrees, average being 4.4. Okay. Well, what about January? That graph isn't quite as radical, but you can see that in the middle there, from late 50s to early 80s was the coldest period on that graph, and then our Januaries have been primarily spending time above normal, and that 2000, I remember what year that was, maybe 2003, where that highest number is on the graph. That's for the country. That was the warmest January for maximum temperatures. Okay, tired of looking at graphs yet? Got one more, and then about 12 to follow. All right. So globally, that was the United States we looked at. Let's look at globally, and what bothers me about this graph is that it's relative to 1951 to 1980, right there. So that's our baseline. And the black line is showing you whether you're above that or below that on an annual basis. And you're not even a degree Celsius as you get to the end of the graph on the right. And I know that a lot of the data back here is pretty sparse. I don't have every station in the United States that has records back to 1880. But that's a pretty good record in the middle. But it's also when we were the coldest. So to say that trend line is indicative of how much we've been warming, I say thank you, somebody, because I wouldn't want to be around when it was as cold as it was in the 50s to early 80s. It was cold. That was the coldest period we had till last year. That was 1 year. This was a string of years in that red box. Okay. What about snowfall on looking at the United States, for instance? Last February, on the 22nd, every single state in the United States had accumulated snow.
Wow. Wow.
Except Florida. No. Hawaii had the lowest elevation snowfall ever recorded last February. Next year they'll be opening up a ski area with a base at 6,200 feet, same as Jackson. Okay? Yeah, that's Jackson Hole elevation in Hawaii. Blows me away. Significant. This is from Rutgers University, and they've analyzed about the same number of years that we have here, 67 to, this is current through 2019, and the trend over North America for snow extent, the greatest extent of snow cover that we have in the North American continent has a steady rise to it. That's what the gray line is. That's millions of square kilometers, because they're doing scientific. I don't even know how many miles that is, but it's probably a lot. What did I do? Oh, okay.
Lower Valley strikes again.
Yeah. But here's what's interesting. This is the winter, midwinter, extent. If you go and look at spring, we've actually seen a decline since 1967 of the snow extent in the spring months. I don't know what month they pick. I can't remember that. But if you go back the other way, before the winter starts, in the fall, the snow cover extent has been increasing. So snowy or early season, less snow cover over the North American continent in the late season. Which means now the ski areas are going to start opening October 1st, closing mid-February. Call it good. Okay. And I found that interesting. So they also looked at the entire northern hemisphere, and the graphs look really similar. The trend lines look really similar for the entire hemisphere. These were just for the North American continent. So they match up pretty well, at least for our hemisphere. One of the questions that was posed to me by young August Yost that he had in his report that I thought needed some correction was, are severe weather events increasing? I mean, snowstorms, they're so sporadic, it's hard to say how you gauge it. How much water did you get with it? How many inches of snow did you get with it? Did you get wind with it? Did it blow power lines down? Did it cause the Sears roof to collapse? Did we have avalanches running, closing off all avenues coming in and out of town? Did it hit the TJ Maxx and bury cars? I can't count those winter events as severe. Yes, they are, and I don't know that they've been increasing, because I know we've had pouring rain every month of the year in Jackson. As long as I've lived here, I've had thunderstorms every month of the year recorded. It's rained. I think it was in 1993 to the top of the tram on the 1st of January or early January. And then refroze and made some incredible skiing, as if you were in Vermont. So I really can't gauge that. So really all I had to go on was looking at hurricanes, which are popular in the media, popular in the news. And the worst years, or worst decade, was in the 40s. And then I thought, well, this only goes through 2010. So I looked up what we've had so far in this decade, from 2011 to 2018, and the bar's kind of low. We got another year last year that's not included in that yet, and there were a number of hurricanes that affected the United States, made landfall. So the red bars are category 1, 2. The blue bars are category 3 or greater. And we had 3 of those in the last roughly 9 years prior to last summer. And and 8 category 1 to 2. So not that significant. The trend there doesn't look to be increasing to me. But I'm just staring at graphs like you guys. Okay? And then violent tornadoes, anything F3 or greater. Going through, the latest data I could get was from the Storm Prediction Center, was through 2014. What's really interesting to me is that it shows way more strong or violent tornadoes back in the 50s to the mid-70s or early 70s. That's before social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder, you know, any of those were, and the population has doubled, I believe, in the United States. Maybe I'm making that up, but it feels like it, since then. And there's more eyeballs out there. There's guys that, you know, are storm chasing everywhere. You'd think there'd be more recorded, but these are strong to violent. Maybe F1s, there's more reports. I don't know. I couldn't get that data. So my point there is what's increasing is the number of people that are on the planet. The number of people affected by weather events has certainly increased, which means the dollar amount for damage goes up. And the number of ways that these events get reported now, it's almost instantaneous. And direct line, you can get an app to send your observations and pictures right to your local National Weather Service office. So if people say, is weather getting more severe? It's like, well, if you keep saying that, you believe that. But as far as hurricanes and tornadoes go, I say no from that data that we just looked at. So, and you know, the more you hear it, the more you fear it, right? Oh, it's getting worse. Oh, it's going to get worse. Just like when I was in college. Oh, it's going to get colder. Next ice age is coming. Okay? So let's go back. Since this is a geology group, we'll give it another 5 minutes or so, and then you guys can drill me. Let's go back in time, in steps. We were looking at like the last 100 years, right? Basically. So let's go back a couple thousand years. Back to when Jesus was a baby. Excuse me. Back to the year 0. Dang it. The religion thing. All right. Who are you going to vote for? No. So looking at this last 2,000 years, and this is reconstructed. It's not, it wasn't somebody taking weather observations, I can tell you that. But back, let's just say right after the guy who got the calendar started. Is that politically correct enough for everybody? I think it was Gregorian or Gregory. He was a saint. Dang, that's religious again. Anyway, they came up with this calendar that said, all right, we're going to start here and go this way. All right, so that's year 0, and that'd be 1 AD right there in the bottom left-hand corner. And apparently, during that early period, early 300 years, the Roman warming period was quite warm. All the Romans moved into England and built the baths and had a good time growing grapes and things like that, which you probably wouldn't do today in England. Then we went into the Dark Ages, and it got cold and miserable between 300 and 800 AD. So about 500-year span there, roughly. Then we warmed up again, and everybody was happy. Medieval times, you know, they're slugging grog and having a good time and eating big turkey legs with their bare hands. And you've seen all those movies from medieval times. And that lasted about 400 years, and then it started getting cold again, and we dipped into the Little Ice Age. And that was kind of a grim period of time worldwide. And most of this is coming, you know, from Europe, right? Well, then we started warming up again. It was 1714 that Gabriel Fahrenheit invented the thermometer. And then after that, everybody came up with their own scale. That Celsius guy came up with his. It wasn't Joe Centigrade. But that was the first mercury thermometer. Was in 1714, but we didn't start measuring air temperatures for weather until about 1850. So that's when our actual thermometer record started, mainly on the East Coast. So any of those old records were from about then. I don't know what kind of quality the thermometers were prior to the early 1900s, but that's the history on the thermometer for you. Here's the history of the world's greatest spheres from when we went into the Little Ice Age to today. So during the Little Ice Age, the 1300s, people were dying of the Black Plague. Then they came out of that, things were starting to warm up in the 1800s, so the only way to stay warm at the end of the Little Ice Age was to work 16 hours a day, so you had a cozy factory to be in. Okay? Hopefully a foundry where they had a lot of heat. Okay? Then the 1900s, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, blah, blah, blah. That's all we did. We just fought people. Okay? And so we were too busy to worry about the weather. And it wasn't until we got into the 1900s that we even had a thermometer to measure it so that we could whine about the weather and say it's too hot or too cold. Or it's colder than normal, warmer than normal. We didn't have a normal yet as far as the thermometer goes. And then, now we're in the 2000s and everybody whines about the weather and, well, I'm so offended by what you're saying, Mr. Woodmencey, and I have a daughter who's of this age, so I understand. I get it. All right, well, that was just for fun, really, but it's actually pretty relevant, if you ask me. So that is, 2,000 years of record going back. So now let's go back before that guy who invented Christmas was born and look at what we have. Can I say Christmas? Yes. Thank you. I didn't get a lot of yeses. Heathens. All right. 10,000 year record. Going back to the end of the last ice age for you geologists, glaciologists types. And you can see the ups and downs. You can see that medieval warm period and how cold it was right at the end of the last ice age. There's a little ice age, just a little blip of a few hundred years. Man started